Olá, seja bem-vindo a mais um programa da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, dedicado ao mês da Ciência e Educação. Hoje estamos na Universidade Nova, School of Business and Economics, para um debate que prevejo ser extremamente interessante sobre o ensino à distância. Com a pandemia de Covid-19, foi incrível a transformação que aconteceu no mundo da educação, onde passámos de aulas nas salas para os ecrãs. O que é que aprendemos até agora? Qual é o balanço que podemos fazer? E que ajustes ainda terão de ser feitos também para melhorar as condições para os professores, para os alunos e para as famílias que tentam seguir esta nova normalidade? São algumas perguntas que vamos fazer aos nossos convidados especiais. Começo por apresentar Neuza Pedro, que está aqui comigo. Neuza, boa tarde.
Muito boa tarde.
É um prazer. A Neuza é professora do Instituto de Educação na Universidade de Lisboa e investigadora também na área da educação à distância, e ela está aqui comigo. Também neste programa, e juntando-se ao debate, está Terry Anderson, professor e investigador na Universidade de Athabasca, no Canadá, e em cujo mestrado em Educação à Distância leciona. Portanto, é um grande prazer ter ambos. Vou começar com a Neuza e fazer o switch no microchip para o inglês. Neuza, first question will go to you, but it's actually to both, so I'll ask Terry to join in as well. And I have to start with your views on how your educational environments and systems reacted and adapted to something which was so dramatic, from going to a normality of classroom to learning and teaching on screen. How did you follow that transition, and what can you say about it really as you were going through it?
Well, those were very difficult times, and we hope they are going to be completely finished nowadays, but we know that things might not be like that. We closed our schools for quite a few months in the beginning of March 2020, and then in January 2021. Kindergartens, elementary schools, secondary schools, universities, all were closed. Students and teachers had to find a way to continue educating, learning, teaching with no background on distance education. And this is quite important because we don't have a culture or a history on distance education. This is something that Portugal was not being able to do in the last decades, and we had to do it from one Friday to one Monday, and this was not easy at all. So I think that considering what was the circumstances, we did the best we could. Of course, teachers were not totally proficient with using technology. Of course, children, teenagers, they were not properly prepared to use technology, because sometimes we think about kids as digital natives. They are completely used to use their mobile phones and so on, but this is not the thing when we think about learning. They are able to do it socially, they are able to do it for lecture, for play, but not so much for learning. So when they were asked to do it, it was very hard for them. And when you think about teachers, it is more or less the same, because in the last years we have not provided them the opportunity for developing the digital skills that they needed. And also, we didn't have the technical and the technological infrastructures in school that we needed for school to move, for classroom to screen, as you pointed out. So, again, we did the best we could, and we have been learning through the process. But I like to look at things from a positive way, and I think that we can gain a lot from it. So not only our government starts to implement a digital plan for education, also they invested a lot in improving the infrastructures. There is a plan now for providing teachers with digital competencies, so we are improving things. And this might lead us to say that we can take out something from the pandemic, because the pandemic took a lot of things from us. So we have to do the same and gain and understand what are the lessons learned from this process.
We'll get more into those details soon, Neuza, but I wanted to get some insight on what you noticed in your environment as well in North America and Canada, and I guess in university education, because we'll get into that as well, that different levels of schooling had different levels of challenges, right? What did you notice on your side, Terry?
Yeah. Well, we had a very similar situation. We were probably shut down totally in the schools for 6 to 8 months. And then we tried to open up, especially in the K-12 world, to having the schools open, but wouldn't be long before there would be an outbreak and we'd be closed down again. And so there's great, people didn't really know what was going on, whether this was long-term or what the end result is. And as you noted earlier, we still don't know what the end is because it goes on. I think as compared to Portugal, Canada has a bit of a longer tradition of distance education. Most of the big school divisions have homeschooling or online education as an alternative. So it wasn't like it was completely unknown in Canada. But what was really different was that when students and teachers were being prepared, there was long lists of the technology they would need. They wanted to be at a distance, or they were forced to for whatever reasons, geography or illness or whatever. And they were really, it was something that they had gotten their heads around. Whereas in under the emergency distance education, people were just thrown in, as Nusa had just said, and a lot of them were not prepared. And we found lots of holes in the, like, I would go around and ask all the students and young people I met, what was your online experience like? And for some, it was almost didn't even exist, like they were just not engaged. And for others, it was great. You know, they had a home, they had a support, they had a teacher who knew what they were doing, had competence. And so there was a huge variability. But I think overall, and we'll probably get into it, the learning opportunities were huge. And education is notorious for not responding to political or cultural or technological change. And there was no choice for the last year and a half in Canada.
You mentioned preparation, Terry, and it's curious because my mother's a teacher and she gives private lessons, and she's 73 years old, and she was used to receiving students at home, and all of a sudden she has to give classes on Skype or WhatsApp or whatever it may be. So I saw her teaching herself how to adapt. And how prepared were teachers, and how prepared on the other side were the students and the families to have this technology come in and get into their bedrooms or their living rooms? And how did that dynamic work out?
Yeah, well, it was variable, but one thing is that the sort of the network era, the Facebook, all the other social media, as Nusa said, it often was through a mobile, but people were more used to and are more used to online shopping, online meetings, online this and that. So it was a change, but I think people could hook onto it from other aspects in the pre-COVID days, and some, of course, were more able. I think there's huge variability in the quality depending on the age of the students, or I mean, in Canada, the seniors are still not connected to the internet in many ways, whereas almost everyone else is. So if you're huge variability, and but I think everyone has felt, they don't want this to be the new normal, but it will never go back to the old normal of it has to be done face to face or we don't do it kind of thing.
What did you see, Nusa, and do you agree about? We'll get into it more later, but do you agree that it's changing anyway? So the preparation, how did you see the preparation and the adjustment?
I saw that teachers really work together to find solutions. And this is very, very important. We should keep this for the future. Being a teacher is a very isolated profession, but the type of problems that teachers need to address, they are not possible to solve by he or she alone. It has to be a collective movement. And we saw that happening through the pandemic. But I would like to say that teachers were not well prepared, but more in a more difficult positions were the principals, the directors, people that has to run schools, like school boards, because they were the ones they were asked to develop digital education plans for the schools, they were the ones who had to take decisions about how am I going to organize the school schedule, how many minutes are kids being online, synchronous or asynchronously, and they were taking decisions about something that they don't know anything about, so it was very hard for them. But again, I saw a great movement of collaboration and people discussing and finding what are the best we can do for this moment. And also I saw the same things in families. Those were very hard days for parents. As you said, their workplace was at home, students' learning environment was at home, both had to coexist, and our houses was not prepared for this to happen. So
and our pets and our babies.
It was very hard for this to be moving smoothly. Of course, it's going to be wrong, and we did the best we could for that. But I think that another thing that was important, and we learned through the process, is that teachers and parents, they need to communicate. It's not possible to educate a child in this world, in today's world, if schools and families do not work together. And through pandemic, again, I saw great process of communication by taking advantage of digital technology. We live in an information society, so we need to change information. Schools and parents need to communicate. And I would hope that when this pandemic is over, our habits of communication, of sharing information and finding collaborative ways of addressing the issues that we have on education will be kept with us for the future.
Terry, I saw you nodding a lot during that answer. Anything you want to react to or add?
Well, just to reiterate, the community of practice that formed from necessity amongst administrators as well as teachers and parents. Like we just didn't know how to do this, what works, what doesn't work. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in the academic literature about this, but it doesn't reach the teachers and the parents, and they're used to learning from each other. And as Nusa said, it is a bit of a lonely profession where you shut the door and when you're a classroom, and all of a sudden that door becomes wide open, and it's not so much even that you don't know who's listening, the parents are listening, or who knows what's happening if you're doing it in real time. But there's also, of course, the surveillance technologies and the privacy issues, which we haven't resolved. And they just got attenuated and made much more visible to people, is how this digital communication, how it permeates and how it can come to be a full-time way of living and working. So scary times in some ways, but lots to learn, and a community is critically important.
Let's delve a little bit deeper into some concrete areas of distance learning and what we're learning from it. Nilsa, gains and losses, and maybe not looking back because we're not over the hump yet, I think it's fair to say, but what are we gaining and losing?
Mm-hmm. I think that we are gaining the idea that digital divide needs to be solved. So the gap between those who has access to technology and ones who has not, it's not possible to ignore. But I would add another idea with the concept of habits, not only access, because it's not really having access that will solve things. We need to make sure that students and teachers, they are used to technology. They feel proficient in using technology. They are okay, they are comfortable in online environments. So it's not only access, it's being used to technology. This is really what we think about digital skills. And this is something that we need to address very, very rapidly. And this is not something that Portugal or Canada needs to solve. No, this is something that the entire world needs to solve, because it's a question of human rights and being able to provide access to education in the future. We don't know how many years this is going to continue happening. So this is really important. Another gain, I would say, is the awareness that learning is not content. Learning is an experience, is interaction, is connection, is being part of a community, is being part of a class, is being part of a group of people who are learning. So it's not just looking videos on YouTube or reading textbooks. This is not things that, this is important, this is content, of course it is important, but it's much more than that. And I would like to keep those things with us for the future. About losses, we know that a lot of kids didn't learn what they were expected to learn. And this is more critical, of course, in the youngest kids, so first grade, second, third, so primary schools. But I think that this is very important in transition years. This is when kids go from primary schools to elementary schools or from middle schools, and from middle schools to secondary schools, and even when they enter university. So this transition, when we think about it from the academic self-concept and the idea of psychological and social well-being, this is critical moments. And living these critical moments through a pandemic, this is very, very hard. So we need to focus on kids, not only the youngest ones, but all the ones who were living transition years. I think this is something that we have been forget about, but we need to keep that in mind.
Pluses and minuses from your side, Terry.
A lot similar situation. I think the awareness of the economic and social context within which the students are learning. We learned a lot. Like we used to say, well, does the student have access to a computer at home? Well, if you have access, but both parents are working on it at home, your brother and your sister, and it's 4 years old, and nobody in the house knows how to fix it or to add a new program, and so it's not just the tools, but the tools are important. But it is that sense of competency, and what we found too is it isn't so much, or as in conjunction with the competency of the net efficacy, if you like, is the pedagogy that teachers and everyone else, when we get into a foreign context, we try to do the same thing and have the same success as we've had before. And a lot of the tools that we were used to using, we couldn't get the student engagement that we had come to expect when you have the attention 100% of the time. So you start worrying about your own competence as a teacher or as a parent, and the students start saying, well, it isn't any fun, or I don't get to do this or that. But what we find, and so when they do the studies, they find that indeed the progress academically was not as great during COVID years. But to say that it's been a complete loss, it's that we've moved miles in terms of learning how our pedagogy should look in different contexts. And we've learned about resilience. So there has been some short-term losses, but the gain in net efficacy, I think, will do students and parents and teachers along a service in the future.
I wanted to talk about social relationships around education, because most of my lifelong friendships were made at school, whether that's secondary school, university. I think the social experience around learning and sharing a classroom and being able to interact with the teacher, and these are all really important components of education, right? So what's your view on that? And in a society where kids sometimes, feels to me, are more comfortable communicating in emojis than in one-to-one conversation, what does this mean for this generation who has been going through this in key formative years, and how their learning experience has been affected and will be affected when classes go back to normal?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I'll try. I think that, and as a distance educator, I've been hearing this argument for an awful long time, is that there is nothing like face-to-face. And true enough, there isn't anything quite like it. But it's kind of like saying that a blind person can't enjoy a trip to the mountains because they can't see the mountains. Well, actually, people learn to develop friendships and relationships through the media, and we see the young people on the social media having 10,000 friends or something like that, which isn't the same as face to face. but it is a relationship that most people these days, young people, they meet their future wives or partners or husbands not on a campus, but online and in a dating app of some sort or another. So it's different, and especially for old people like me, I think that we have a gold standard of the face-to-face, but a thing doesn't have to be made out of gold to be useful to us.
Nilza.
I think I will continue on that, and I would like to say that the comparison between distance and face-to-face is really not properly being done, because we need to compare high-quality face-to-face education with high-quality online education. And when we do that, the differences, looking at performance and engagement, they are not really significant.
Okay.
But it's important to notice that we should look at this experience from the perspective of the kids and the teenagers, not so much of our own, because they really communicate differently. They don't communicate less, they do it differently. They don't read less, they read different things in different formats. But what we do as adults is to look at things from our background. So what I would like to see is not only society, but also researchers to have new frameworks of analysis and understand that the patterns of communication, of engagement, of making relationships, they are changing. And we need to understand how they are changing, how much and what sense they are changing, and not really to become uncomfortable with how things are nowadays. Of course, you need to be aware, you need to be critical about the impact of technology, but more than that, we need to understand it deeply. And now we have, I would say, zero knowledge about really how things are going to be in the future, considering the pandemic that we live. Because, of course, how things were will never be the same, but they can be improved at some level, and we just need to learn how this improvement will be for us in the future. And I would like to add another thing, which is the idea that online nowadays is really about connection and emotions and communication, not so much about content, as it was been in the last decades. Nowadays, people are going online because they want to be connected, because they can't go outside of their homes, so they want to feel near their friends, they want to be near their families, and online was the only way they could do it. And I think they learned to do it in different ways, and we have to understand how different it is in the future, because I think it can be really valid for us to understand how human beings evolve. I really see this as a social experience from what we can really understand how we work as human beings. In this decade, of course, because everything is hyper-connected.
Yeah, well, I wanted to pick up on that because culturally, obviously, education is digested in different ways. I had an opportunity to study here in Portugal. I studied abroad in the United States. I genuinely can say that in Portugal there was more of a focus on theory. In the States there was more a focus on practice. But that was my experience. I've talked to teachers. I've talked to students growing up, and sometimes. There was a feeling amongst many, and there are many arguments, but I'm going to make this, and then I would like you to answer, in this shift in the way that the content is produced and the way the students are consuming it. Because traditionally, I would say that there's a lot of focus on reading and long form, and today's kids are all about short form, right? So is this digital transition happening during COVID years maybe helping to change education? Will be in itself in the future, the books that are read, how long they are, the videos that are shown, the documents that are prepared. Is this being a huge educational revolution in a way of the content itself?
Well, I always hope for the best, so I will say yes. We need to understand how kids nowadays learn. And now we are able to see kids learning in real time. And we have videos of kids learning in real time. So we need to look at that and see what is going on there and how they are going to be effective. but the thing is that when we think about education as reading books, this is not what today's society asks for people to be able to do. So the thing is, the type of skills that today kids need to develop are so different from the ones that we as adults were asked to develop. And on that, I think distance education can be very, very useful, because when you learn online, you have to be autonomous. You have to learn how you are as a learner. You have to understand yourself as a learner. You have to have time management skills. You have to be able to collaborate with each other, because no longer online education is based on individual work. And these skills are quite important for today as a citizen. And I would say more. I'm going to say that all of us in the future will need to know how we learn online. That is a reality that we cannot escape from. All of us will be online learners, independent or dependent of our profession, of the area where we work on. Everything will have to go at least partially through online platforms. So it's a skill that will be very useful for the future.
And I guess I should have used the technical term of pedagogical shift, right? Because that's really what we're talking about here. Terry.
Yeah, I think the biggest pedagogical shift is embedded in the technology, and specifically the technology of video. Is that video for teaching, for learning, for self-directed learning, for communication, it was not around when I grew up, and it's certainly sort of permeates our world. And picking up on your comment about this sort of the more philosophical orientation in Europe, and I've noticed that too. I sometimes feel like a bit of an uneducated peasant when I go to Europe, or at least talk in scholarly concept, because I see myself as being more of a pragmatic sort of person. But I think that pragmatism has been a real factor too in the pandemic, in the sense that all the education technology companies have been ramping up their sales forces, their and giving free services, and it's kind of like the old drug dealer is the first one's free, but after that, who knows? And I think that a lot of companies don't want to waste a good crisis, and so they're getting these decision makers who we talked about earlier to make or buy into certain technologies and certain learning frameworks and certain learning analytics that come with them. And it's very hard to let those things go once people not so much even let them go, but to move to a different brand, if you wish. So I think we have to be on our guard. But final thing is just to pick up on the the empathy, the compassion, that we need to start looking at things through the eyes of the people who are most affected, and that's parents and teachers and students. And I think we can gain lots of insights that you don't get when you say how many people scored this or that on an exam, or how many people completed the course. What are the contexts that they're working in? And when we learn those better, I think we'll be able to adapt our programs to meet those needs.
That's a perfect link to the question I had next, actually, which was about assessment. So whereas all of the education learning part changed to a digital form, assessment many times is still on campus. There's many reasons for that. How has the assessment process worked and changed, and what do you feel will change after eventually some measure of normality is restored? I can start with you, Terry.
Sure. Well, in my own university, as a distance learning, it's 100% distance, and so we have always done remote invigilation in a principal's house or something like that for a final exam. And during the pandemic, we switched over to doing them by video, where your machine gets locked down and you get somebody in some place in the world watching and seeing the keystrokes and all those sort of technological things. So that can be done. But the bigger issue is, are those high stakes exams, are they really necessarily, and are they effective? Because, once you graduate from school, I remember in my last PhD class, I had an exam and I thought, this is the last exam I will ever write in my life. And sure enough, I haven't written another one. So it's not really proven an effective pedagogy to have these high stake exams. And there are alternatives. The things like case-based, problem-based learning, portfolios, badges, things that we have known about for a number of years, but we've had trouble scaling them, and we've had trouble getting adoption amongst teachers and parents. A lot of parents hold great value in these standardized examinations. Despite the fact that teachers have been saying they're not all that useful, they are really dug in many ways.
Nilza, assessment.
I would go with the same idea, which is the fact that for the last years we have been asked schools to engage in real world problems. We ask schools and teachers to provide students with opportunities for them to solve real world problems, to create things that are really useful for their daily lives. But then when we think about assessment, we will continue with this tradition of final exams and 2-hour pen and paper tests. And this is very artificial because it doesn't relate in any way to real life. As Terry said, we only do exams in schools when you are going for a professional promotion, when you are applying for a job. You don't do a test. So it's really artificial. We need to change that. And a lot of universities, a lot of schools are doing that. Project-based learning and online portfolios. Nowadays, we can have all the little and beautiful things that kids do through their entire school process, of kindergarten through universities. They can collect evidences of their learning online, they can keep it online, and they will be able to access it whenever they want. So this really changed everything. Another idea I would like to go is the evolution that we see for the future in the era of artificial intelligence. So a lot of systems will be available for us to write an essay or a paper on it. So how are we going to keep evaluating things in the future when these systems are going to be here for us to use in any way we want? So we have to change things. We have to stimulate creativity. We have to provide them with real world tasks for them to solve, things that really assess the type of skills that today's society needs them to be proficient at. So I do see a lot of benefit from using technology in the process, not for online proctoring exams, not for automatic grading, but more for changing the way we assess students. Because when we think about pedagogical shift, we need to change assessment. If we don't change assessment, learning and teaching will not really and deeply be changing. Assessment is key for all the process. So I'm hoping for the best again, because we saw a lot of great things being done because students were not engaged and teachers had to be very creative. I saw kids doing experimental work on their kitchen. I saw children using their parents' mobile phone to go outside and collect data. So a lot of these little projects, I really hope that they will continue to be developed in the future.
I remember how much I stressed out when I had big exams, and I know other people did, and some kind of shift in that assessment process would get my vote for sure, because in that moment, to be judged on that exam after a full year or half a year or whatever it may be, I mean, you're right, that is a little bit outdated perhaps, and Terry, you made a good point there with the parents wanting to keep certain traditions, I guess, so they can also relate more to their kids and how they are doing, so they can interpret the what's happening right in the classes and in the school year. I wanted to ask also if you had questions for each other and how your respective areas or governments or countries related to that. And Terry, I don't know if you have something you'd like to ask Nilza, considering that you two are experts and I'm not really.
Well, one thing I have visited the Alberta University in Lisbon a couple of times, and I was always struck by the inability of that institution to be as flexible given the government rules on who can offer distance and how much and what's the minimum and maximum, which is certainly different than the more freewheeling world that we see here in Western Canada anyways. So I was wondering whether in Portugal, whether this pandemic has caused a shift in, I guess, the policymakers or the attitudes of people. I imagine it has, because there's nothing like a crisis
emergency
policy. But I'd be interested in a comment on that, and at the K-12 level too. I didn't see very much of any K-12 stuff in Portugal online or at distance, but maybe I was only at the universities.
I think I have bad news and good news for you. Actually, we developed our regulation about distance online education, higher education in Portugal 2 years ago, in March 2019. No pandemic was expected there, but this proves what I told in the beginning, which is we don't have a history on distance education. We only develop regulation for higher education institutions to do online learning 2 years ago. So this is very recent. We are still learning to do it. But this was before the pandemic, and the pandemic really stressed out universities. And in the last years, a lot of higher education institutions try to develop at least some form of online learning programs and courses. And we are hoping that this will start to be developed in the near future. But the good news is also related to elementary and secondary schools, because I think I can say that our elementary and secondary schools are more innovative than our universities. They are more engaged with online technology. They are more open to innovate, to develop pilot projects than our universities. So a lot of things have been done there. A lot of spots of innovation are able to be detected, and our ministry is trying to connect those dots in order for the lessons learned to be shared through the educational system. For universities, I just hope for the best, and maybe some years from now, we will look back and be very happy with the consequences of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. I'd also just be interested in what you're seeing in terms of Portuguese language materials. That's something that I think people really latched onto in North America, is things like the Khan Academy and the National Geographic series and other online resources that had been around for years, but just had never been used in classrooms or in the educational system. But not to suggest that, I know that the predominance or the majority language, of course, is English, but is our quality materials being produced in Portuguese as well? And is that important, I guess?
I would say so, because our Ministry of Education invests a lot of time and money for the next years in a national project, a national action plan for digital education. And one of the lines on that project is really to invest in online platforms and also development of educational resources. So I think that in the future we will have more information about this, but I'm hoping for the best. But because you were talking about Portuguese language, I would like to say that this is something that we really didn't take full advantage of. Because when we look at all the type of content that we could develop in Portuguese and talking about Portugal, sharing our history through the web to the entire world, this is something that we have been able to do in the last years, and we should. Because if we are not going to do it, other countries will do it. Countries that has the investment, the amount of time and money that it's needed, like Brazil, will tell our story, not ourselves. And this is not good or bad in itself, but it has good and bad consequences in it. So I think that we should look at our language as something that we are the ones should be responsible for it and to present it online to the entire world. Because if we are not the ones doing it, someone else will do it.
I have one more question for each, but I wanted to give Nilza an opportunity as well to ask something to Terry specifically if you wanted to. No pressure though.
I would like to know how you think that the concept of distance education will be seen in the future, because we see a lot of misconceptions nowadays. People are using it very unfairly, I would say. Everything is distance education nowadays. So how you see this being organized in some level in the future, or not so much?
Yeah. I just getting back just to the variability. There's good classroom education and there's terrible classroom education, and same. I see more often the term online education, and as if it's one thing, but it's so variable that I think that whenever you get introduced to a new technology or a new flavor of ice cream, it all seems wild and wonderful, but until you've had tastes of 8 other kinds of ice cream, you're not in much of a position to say whether that is good or bad or what it is. And so we will gain that experience. We are gaining that experience with or without the pandemic. As we talked about at the beginning, the net literacy continues to evolve. And so with that, the sophistication and the decision-making powers, I think, are improving and will improve.
Are you satisfied, Nilza?
Yes, I am totally satisfied. How can I not be? It's Terry Anderson.
Okay. Final question from me to put you both on the spot as we wrap up this conversation, which I have found incredibly educational as well, is biggest opportunity and biggest threat in the new normality, whatever that will be after the dust settles. Let's set a landmark in 5 years. What would you like to see, and what can't we see when it comes to the quality, the parameters, the way that education is thriving or not? And I'll start with you, Terry.
Sure. Well, I think one of the biggest dangers that we have to worry about is just the ongoing privatization and commercialization of education at the expense of public education. I think it's a kind of a worldwide sort of neo-capitalist environment that's gained impact during the pandemic. So I hope that we continue to defend public education and look at the effects on people of different income levels. And the second part was just what I fear. What do I look forward to? I guess is just the sense that we are learning how to use these tools more effectively, and we're going to start using them not just for education, but we'll start seeing how you don't have to hop on an airplane every week to go or every summer. You can stay at home, drive, do all sorts of other things. So I'm encouraged by the technology at the same time as I'm a bit worried about it.
So final question to wrap everything up. I would like to ask both of you to talk about the biggest opportunity and the biggest threat once the dust settles, let's say in 5 years, where you hope to see education and where you don't want to see it.
Right. Well, I think it's been sprinkled throughout our conversation is the fact that the net and online resources, whether they're open educational resources or content online, offers huge opportunity for economy of scale, for cutting down some of the gaps between good schools and bad schools. So I think there's huge opportunities to leverage this technology and to improve upon it. The biggest threat I see is that public education itself is under threat. I think there's many corporations who think that they can do a better job And there's many governments who think that teachers are not efficient or all sorts of problems like that. But I think if we lose our public education, we really will exacerbate the differences between the rich and the poor in all of our societies. And so I think we have to. It's a heritage that we have of public education. It's certainly not common in the history of human beings. But we have good, strong public education in Portugal and in North America yet. But there are many forces that are aligned to try to take that public right away from us, I think. So that's the threat.
Thank you, Terry. Final word for you, Neuza?
I would like to say that I would hate to see people lose whatever they learn through the pandemic. So my biggest concern is to look 2 or 3 years ahead from now and see that schools didn't learn anything from this. Nothing changed. Everyone had just trying to go back again to their zone comfort, and this is something that can happen. So we need to really understand that education need to change, and this pandemic can be an opportunity to change. The other thing that I would like to say is that a threat is really to let people see that distance education is really about technology, because it is not. It's really about making human beings connected through technology, learning through technology, but it is a mean, it's not the end of the process. And another idea is that we saw that through this pandemic, teachers were crucial. They really keep on their job, aside from the bad conditions they had. They really were heroes in the process. So I would like to see and to have our societies to see that they are crucial for sustaining society, and also the value of education, the social value of education is really important. And again, the pandemic proved it to us. It's very important. You cannot support a society, you cannot support an economy without education. When it collapses, everything around it collapses. So it's really important to take care of education in the future. Technology will help on that, but it will not be the solution for everything.
Neuza, Terry, an absolute pleasure. Really enjoying the conversation, and I won't really go very long on my conclusion, because I think both of you wrapped everything up very well. Foi prazer falar com a Neuza e com o Terry sobre o impacto da pandemia no mundo da educação, na forma de vários países lidarem com ela e os prós e contras relativamente àquilo que pode ser aprendido para ajustar, renovar, reinventar a forma da educação ser dada tanto a nível presencial como à distância. Foi mais um excelente programa, digo eu, da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, neste mês dedicado à ciência e à educação. Obrigado, até breve.